Hi crochet friends, welcome back to my channel. I'm Stefania and today I'm going to show you how I transform a simple jar into one of my crochet plant pots. These plant pots are perfect for those dark areas of your home or office where there's just not enough light for a houseplant to survive, or for people who just can't remember to water their plants. So join me as we go from this to this. Remember to leave a like and subscribe if you like this content and want to see more. For my plant pots, I use recycled jars from my kitchen. This one originally had pickles in it. I'm also using this variegated DK weight yarn for this jar, but you can use whatever yarn you like. I'm using my Susan Bates 4mm hook for this project. Use whatever size hook is appropriate for the yarn you choose. I'll start with a magic ring with 8 single crochets in it. A lot of patterns start with 6 single crochets in a magic ring, but I like to start my plant pots with 8 because I don't mind if there's a small hole at the bottom, since there won't be any stuffing used in this project. I also like starting with 8 because I find it results in the increases creating a better fit for the jars I use. However, do whatever works best for you. There's no one right way of crocheting. Once there are 8 single crochets in the magic ring, pull the tail to tighten. For the next round, I increase in each of those stitches, making sure to go over the tail to avoid having to weave it in later. These increases will give us 16 stitches around. For round 3, single crochet, then increase, repeating 8 times, resulting in 24 stitches around. Round 4 is where the technique differs depending on if you started with 6 or 8 single crochets in the magic ring. If you've started with 6 single crochets, round 4 would be 2 single crochets and an increase repeated 6 times, and round 5 would be 3 single crochets and an increase repeated 6 times, resulting in 30 stitches around. Instead, since I started with 8 single crochets, I'll skip the 2 single crochet round, and my round 4 will be 3 single crochets and an increase, repeated 6 times, giving us 30 stitches around. Here's those directions visually if you're having a hard time following what I'm saying. Regardless of how many single crochets you put into your magic ring, the following round will be 4 single crochets and an increase repeated 6 times. Continue increasing your circle by adding another single crochet stitch in between each of the 6 increases until it is the right size for your jar. For this jar, I ended up adding one more increase round, so 5 single crochets and an increase repeated 6 times, giving me 42 stitches around. circle up to the base of the jar to make sure it is the size I want. I aim for the circle to be just a bit smaller than the base of the jar, since as we start building up the sides, the circle will get a bit bigger. If your circle is bigger than the base, consider frogging or undoing the last round, otherwise the crochet cover won't fit properly. Once the circle is the right size for your jar, it's time to start building up the sides. For this jar, I decided to just use single crochet stitches for the whole thing since I want the variegation to be the standout detail. However, this is a great place to customize your pot with different stitch patterns. I've made plant pots using the boss stitch, alternating rows of single, double, and treble crochet stitches, changing between front loops and back loops, playing around with color changes, whatever I'm feeling like that day. The only goal is to cover the jar, so you can do that in whatever way makes you happy. Since this jar is all single crochet stitches, I'm going to skip ahead a bit and bring you back in when I'm closer to the top. As I reach the top of the jar, I like to try it on for size to see just how much further I need to go. As you can see, I just need a couple more rows to reach the top. Again, here you have some more options to customize your plant pot. You can either continue just using single crochet stitches, or you can increase to have a bit of flair at the top. If the jar cover is a bit tight, I like to do this so that it's easier to fit the soil piece in later. You can also just do it for the style. For some plant pots, I've even added a lot of increases to make a ruffled edge. Again, do whatever you want to make your creation your own. One thing I like to keep in mind, regardless of the style of the top, is to make sure the jar cover goes a bit past the top of the jar. In regular potted plants, the soil is usually a bit below the lip of the pot, so I try to mimic that aspect here. Once the plant pot is the height you want, you can either slip stitch and tie off your yarn, or you can add a decorative edge. Again, this is a great place for customization. There are a number of finishing stitches you can use. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see a video going over some of these techniques. For this jar, I used slip stitch chain 1 technique. This is a pretty simple edge stitch to do, and I like the subtle detail it adds. Once you've gone all the way around with your edge stitch, it's time to tie and cut the yarn, leaving a bit of a tail to weave in later. Now that the pot cover is complete, the next thing we need to make is the soil. I chose to use a dark brown yarn for this plant pot as I thought the colors complemented each other. Using the same magic ring with 8 single crochet increasing technique we used earlier, make a circle to fit the lid of your jar. Some jars have a smaller lid than the base of the jar, so pay attention to make sure you're making the right size. This was the case for this jar. I only needed to make a circle with a circumference of 36 stitches. Once you have your circle, continue single crocheting in each of the stitches to cover your lid. You don't need to worry about a finishing stitch for the edge of this piece, since it will be hidden inside your pot. Once the piece is large enough to cover your lid, simply slip stitch and cut and tie the end, leaving a short tail to weave in later. When the pot cover and soil pieces are complete, it's time to sew in the ends. I'll start with the soil, taking my yarn needle and pushing it between a few stitches on the inside. I then go through a couple more stitches to secure the end. It's okay if there's a bit of the tail left, because later we'll be gluing the soil onto the lid of the jar and you won't be able to see it. For the jar cover, I'll again use my needle to bring the tail to the inside. I then go through a couple of stitch loops before trimming the tail. Since we tied the yarn when we cut it, we don't need to worry about tying the end of the tail, just tucking it in so you can't see it. Finally, we get to the plant portion of this process. As you can see, I have a ton of plants that I've already made, so I can figure out what kind I think works best for this particular pot. Of course, you don't need to do this, I just thought it would be nice to show off some of the different options. To keep this video from being too long, I won't be showing how to make these plants, but I do plan on making separate tutorials for each of the plants in the future. Keep an eye out on my community tab. I'll be putting up a poll where you can vote on which plant you want to see a tutorial for first. After going through the plant options, I decided that I liked the look of this heartleaf vine. I thought the color goes well with the pot cover, and the height of the jar was asking for vines trailing down it. So now I'll take the soil off the jar and attach the vines. To do this, I first pull the tail of the soil through to the center using my hook. If you don't have a tail, or if the tail isn't long enough, you can use a separate piece of yarn. I'll then thread the needle and push it through the center of the vines where I want them to meet the soil. I'll then sew back into the soil a couple of times to secure the vines. Finally, I use my needle to tie the yarn tail into the loops of the soil to secure it. The final step of making a plant pot is to glue the soil to the lid. I use hot glue for this step as it sticks well to both the metal lid and the yarn. Feel free to experiment with whatever glue you have on hand though. I take the cover off the jar to protect it from accidentally getting glue on it. Then once the glue is hot, I put a good-sized dollop in the center. I then carefully push the center of the soil into the glue to hold it down. Then I like to lay the jar on its side and add a thin strip of glue all the way around the edge of the jar. I press the fabric down into the glue as I go and try not to add too much glue so that it comes out the side. Once this step is done, the soil should be nice and secure, and the plant pot is finished. Thanks so much for watching till the end of this tutorial. If you haven't already, it would help me a lot if you hit that like and subscribe button. Comment below what you thought of this tutorial and what tutorial you would want to see next. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye!